You're listening to The Donor Doctor Show, where your host, James Newberry, will help you improve the health of your fundraising. Now over to James.
Hello, this is The Donor Doctor, and I'm with Greg Munford, who was the star singer for the song, the number one hit, Incense and Peppermints. Welcome, Greg.
Hi, how are you?
Now, tell me about that experience of having a number one hit.
Well, it was back in the 60s, in 1966 when we recorded it in Southern California. I was in high school, and all it was me, like a billion other guys my age at the time, just was in a band, and we just loved playing music, and I didn't like high school very well, so I spent a lot of time, more time than I should have, being in a rock and roll band.
Now, the group was Strawberry Alarm Clock, but you were never really a member of that group.
That's right. I had my own band called The Shapes, and we had the same manager of the band that became the Strawberry Alarm Clock. And we would do gigs on weekends, take our money, and then go into recording studios to try to become rock and roll stars. And they recorded an instrumental track that it turned out their singer, they didn't like the way he sang, so they had me come in and do the vocal track to this song that became Incense and Peppermints. And, in a few months' time, it started to get airplay, and inch by inch, it worked its way up the charts. And by the summer of '67, we realized we had like a hit record on our hands.
That's right.
So,
it's in the psychedelic rock genre.
That's right.
It's a star one.
Yeah, kind of psychedelic bubblegum.
It's been featured in Austin Powers' movie and The Simpsons.
That's right. Yeah, my fame continues to just go on and on and on.
And one of the people, the guitarist there, Ed King, of course, went on to fame with Leonard Skinner.
That's right.
Which is probably the most famous Southern rock band.
That's right. Yeah, Ed was he was the guitarist and co-writer of Incense and Peppermints, and he then left the band and joined Leonard Skinner. And then his lick, he was the one who wrote, and whose lick is the famous lick in Sweet Home Alabama.
That's a great classic.
Yeah, that's Ed. And Ed pretty much retired on that one.
That's nice.
You've been living a life of leisure in Nashville for about the last 30 years.
Well, that's
so,
great.
Yes.
Have you been to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland?
No, I haven't, and that's crazy because it would be a lot of fun, but I don't know.
Well, they have one section, if you go, they have one-hit wonders. In other words, number one hits.
Oh, yeah.
And I listened to a few of them, like I knew that Afternoon Delight, Bill Danhoff,
right.
Starlight Vocal Band. And
right.
So yours is probably in there, too.
I think it is. It's funny, actually, that particular one you mentioned, that was written by a guy who lived in D.C. He had
Bill Danhoff, locally.
Right, okay. Right. So, I'm hoping that I'm in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I haven't gone and checked it out, but
I'm sure you are. They got a list of all of them. I listened to around a half dozen of them. I remember, I had to think of what was being a number one hit. One-hit wonder.
Well, that's what I hope that's the case. So.
Now, you went to University of Southern California.
That's right.
And you were telling me you overlap with O.J. a little bit.
Yeah, at least I think so. I mean, the truth of the matter is that I've never been a sports fan. So even though I was at USC during their golden years in football, I paid no attention to it. So,
right. I've never met him, but I did overlap with him. I went to the Kentucky Derby in 2006. It was the Queen, me, and OJ. And I saw him from a distance. So. Which one doesn't belong?
Well, I'll be sure to say hello to him for you next time I run across him.
And then you went to the University of Chicago.
That's right. Yeah.
And what did you study there?
I studied something called musicology. I was a music theory and composition major at USC, and then went on to graduate school at the University of Chicago to study musicology and sort of the history of music theory and this kind of thing. I didn't finish it. I didn't get a degree.
But you made a switch. You got hired by the Marson advertising firm, which has now become the Burson Marsteller Public Relations and Advertising. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. I by the time I was now approaching 30 years old, and I had realized that I wasn't really going to be an academic. And I'd since realized I wasn't going to be a rock and roll star. And I'd met the woman that I wanted to marry, and I was 29 years old. And I thought, oh my God, what the hell am I going to do? So naturally,
I've been there too.
Yeah, I naturally thought I'd go into advertising. And so I literally got some books on how to write copy, and Chicago was a good town to be in advertising, and it was less competitive than New York, but still a very active advertising town.
Well, Claude Hopkins was in Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
And we're worked for Lasker, Albert Lasker.
Oh, yeah.
So he was a brilliant man. So it is a great advertising town.
Yeah.
What were some of the accounts that you worked for, if you can tell?
Oh, I had, let me think. I between Marsteller and then the other agency I worked for was something called Maxwell Stroh, which is that's where I got into direct marketing. But we did a lot of work for Zale Jewelry. The Marsteller had a lot of business-to-business accounts. So I worked for something called the Caldwell Westinghouse, and they did something called slack adjusters. And those are like the things that they're like shock absorbers between freight cars.
Okay, sure.
So, really interesting stuff like that. But the thing that broke my spirit, though, was I did a catalog for Pearl Jewelry. Mm-hmm. And for a Zale Jewelry, it was an upscale division of Zale that they'd started. And it was just page after page after page of writing descriptive copy for Pearl Jewelry. And guess what? After about 4 or 5 things, you run out of stuff to say.
Right.
And then you've got like 30 pages of copy. You're like,
you can only use exquisite so many times.
Exactly. Believe me, I went through the thesaurus. It was the most dog-eared book in the house. So anyway, I thought,
Richard Armstrong was a previous guest. He the toughest thing he ever wrote, and it worked, was something for sewing.
Oh God, I can imagine. It's making me cringe just to remember this stuff.
Well, then you got into direct marketing.
Mm-hmm, that's right.
And how'd that happen?
Well, I was working at Marsteller as just a junior copywriter. It was and that was a straight ad agency. But I quickly realized that I was not really the corporate agency type of person. I just was not comfortable there. And I liked the idea of going out on my own. And my office happened to be next door to the guy who was the head of the promotions department. And we used to sort of sit around the water cooler. And he told me about direct marketing, direct mail. And the thing that really piqued my interest was that I understood there was a lot of guys who could work independently in direct marketing. They could be freelancers and make a good living. And I thought, ooh, that sounds pretty good. Mm-hmm. So, sort of long story short, I made the switch from Marsteller to a direct marketing agency, this Maxwell Stroh, to learn that. And then as soon as I could, and my political interest then drove us to D.C. And then as quickly as I could, I stopped working for somebody. So.
Right. And you worked for Stephen Winchell.
That's right. I worked for Steve Winchell for a year or two, and then Richard Viguerie for a year, or a little over a year, and then
we've talked about Richard Viguerie a lot on the show, but Stephen Winchell is really a giant in the field.
Oh, sure.
And he was a lot of the most prestigious museums in this country, like Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm in the museum, so I recently talked to the president. He follows my mail, I follow his.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Well, it's funny. It's a coincidence, but you'll have to know. I actually wrote the original control package for the Statue of Liberty.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, with
Lee Iacocca's
signature.
Yeah, that's a great package.
That was my package.
Oh,
yeah.
Really?
Yeah, of course, it had a lot going for it other than my brilliant copy. But
it's a great story.
But it was a lot of fun to work on that.
Yeah.
I remember when Steve came in with a description of what this was going to be. Before they had the Ellis Island Foundation, all this kind of stuff, and we're all kind of thinking like, oh, that's kind of cool. But is this really good? It hadn't really focused yet.
Right.
And then when we found out we had an Iacocca signature, it was like, ooh, that sounds pretty good.
Right.
So, but yeah, I was actually the one that drove that first package.
Right. There's two Ellis Island groups. There was a New Jersey backed one and a New.
Oh, I didn't realize.
I did one for the New Jersey.
I see. All right. Well, we'll arm wrestle after this meeting.
I know a little bit about Ellis Island.
All right.
But that's a great appeal.
Yeah.
But then you eventually went out on your own. Is that right?
That's right. It was in '84, I think it was, and again, I'd been really anxious to do that for a long time. And started, and it was, I had one of the things that enabled me to do it was that I was doing some moonlighting for Time Life Books. So in addition to the political stuff, I did a whole lot of work for Time Life Books.
I know those people. I used to play on their softball
team.
Is
that right?
Yes, I do.
Oh, they were great. They were great guys to work for and had fun projects. And
why do you think they're out of business? Is it the internet?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think so. I remember I remember some of the specific things. One of the things that drove them out of business was that and I guess this must have been about in the mid '80s or early '80s or something, when the cost of postage started to increase dramatically, and they started to increase the cost of postage for flats, and their control packages were always these oversized packages.
Right.
Well, they went to those things, and you just couldn't break that cost barrier on those, and so because of the nature of the product, the visuals were so important with this big, splashy, colorful, big 9x12 envelopes, and this kind of thing. So that hurt. And then I think eventually the internet is what drove it down, because truthfully, they were providing information that was hard to get, but as the internet got stronger and stronger, you could get that information. It just wasn't so hard to get anymore.
Yeah,
so.
That's interesting. Of course, the newspapers are getting killed too.
Indeed, so. Yeah. No, it's.
But direct mail itself isn't. People say it's going to, but I've heard this so many years. It's actually not really. I mean, it's held up rather well compared to the others.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. It's certainly the classic problems of increasing postage and production costs, etc. hurts. And I suppose at some point the mail will be severely impacted by the internet. But the fascinating of the internet is so high compared to how it actually works, especially in fundraising. It's that there's an odd kind of a mismatch. But mail still is a very viable medium.
I was listening to Ben Hart, and he's actually in some cases going back to direct mail from email, because email rates have dropped. Open rates, because it's so oversaturated. It's free, but because it's free, it's oversaturated.
Right. It's incredibly oversaturated. Yeah. No, I think that's true.
Now, I met you at a DMAW. Where you talked about immortality. I was the guy heckling you. No, I wouldn't heckle you.
Well, that's very funny. Yeah,
but I think that's interesting. You talked about immortality. What did you mean there?
Well, I do remember that. That was one of the things where I definitely lost most of the crowd on that. But my original premise of that, which I still think is true, which is try to get to the understanding of why people give, and to give to either political or charitable causes. And, I mean, you immediately say, well, gee, I want to give because I make a difference. But anybody that's intelligent knows that your $10, I'm sorry, it really doesn't make a difference. It's going to go on with you or without you, whether or not you send in $10 or not. It's sort of like voting. And therefore, to me, I'm trying to understand the reason in order to then try to understand copy, I think of it more in terms of they do it because it helps give you meaning. And the idea that, and like you say, the reason you vote is not because I think I'm going to win the election by doing this.
It's duty, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's duty, and because I just feel it's important for me as a citizen to go and do what I'm supposed to do and vote.
Right.
And so when I give to a cause, it's because I think the cause is important and I want to be part of it. It's not because I think my $10 is going to make that difference. And so then I come back to the question, then where does this drive for meaning come from? And that's where I have this notion that part of it is the fact that we strive to find a reason to move forward in the face of the fact we know at some point we're going to die. You got to have things that are more important than you, and more important than your life. And therefore, I think the knowledge of our mortality is what gives us a hunger for meaning, because I think you get up in the morning and you got to have a reason to live in the face of the fact that you're going to die.
Exactly.
And so I do think this quest for meaning is a very fundamental drive in human beings, and I think that we as fundraisers, that's really where you start. And
we need to tap into that.
Yeah, and I think, and if we don't do it cynically, if we understand, if we're supporting causes that we think are worthwhile, I think to make that connection is something that is both worthwhile, and it also opens up different creative avenues.
Right.
So it isn't like you don't have to say, if I don't get you to sign this petition, or the constant carping like on public radio, well, we're going to go off the air if you don't give. Well, that's not true. Mm-hmm. That's not true. So what are the other reasons why you might get somebody to give? It's you can connect with their sense that giving is meaningful. And so that's sort of where that came from. It's a little bit obtuse, but
I was listening to a podcast that David Garfinkel, he's a copywriter, does, and it was interesting. I'm not into multi-level marketing. I imagine you aren't either.
No, not really. No.
But
I'm not in any marketing.
I'm always leery of people inviting me for a lunch, for something like that. But he did an interesting focus group, and what he found out is that people weren't as interested in getting rich, which they typically sell. They like the sense of community.
That's interesting.
And there's a hunger for community. And I think also giving gives you that too.
Yeah.
Because you give membership cards often, but even
I
if
think
you don't,
that's right. Yeah. No, I think that's interesting. I actually years ago created a sort of a rather elaborate chart of all the potential reasons that you would give, and my operating sort of theory is you got to have at least 3 of these things going for you, and then you build the creative package around prioritizing what these things might be. So the kind of tests that we did were not as much like different size envelopes. We did that, but they were sort of rearranging the priorities of these reasons to give, and then building headlines and things out of that. And including things like that. I mean,
sure.
so no, I think there's people are complicated, and they part with their money and their time for complicated reasons. So
now, your biggest organization was a seniors group.
Yeah.
And mailed a lot. I when I worked on Capitol Hill, I'd read their mail all the time. It was about something called the Notch Babies.
Right? Yeah. That's how they started. We didn't actually do that,
good.
But yeah.
That though, with somebody giving to that, is that really immortality, or is that more self-interest that they're giving to that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, but again, you got to get back to the idea that you got to get back to the reality that even people who don't think much about it, they must know in some ways that their single contribution isn't going to want to make the difference.
In other words, they're doing their part.
They're doing their part, and they want to have a say, and they want to feel like they're doing something. But if you stress too hard that this isn't going to work without you, then I think that stretches the credibility. And so the other thing is, what are the other things that kind of go along with this? And that, again, this is the chart I had, but there's all kinds of things. There's a sense of community. There's a sense of of the enemy who you don't like and you want to say something against them. I mean, there's a number of things that go into this. But you're right. It's something like the Notch issue, where people who they're because of their birth years, they got short
less money.
Yeah, shortchanged on Social Security. And then there was legislation to try to fix that, and you're right. That's how that organization grew. It was a little before my time, so we didn't write much on the Notch issue, which was
right. Oh, okay. I just remember it from
that.
But,
no, that was big for them for a long time. Yeah.
Right. Now, you eventually sold your company, right?
Mm-hmm,
and
that's right.
to Walter Lukens.
That's right.
And of course, I worked there a bit too in the early 90s. And he's done a great job of diversifying his client base.
Yes, he has. He's done a terrific job. It's funny because Walter and I were friends and competitors for decades, and it wasn't until probably maybe now 6 or 7 years ago that I appreciated how well he had diversified and grown the company. I was very impressed when I saw that, which is why I immediately thought, he's somebody who might want to buy me out. No, and of course that's also reflective of Walter's very wide-ranging interests. He's not just a political guy. He's obviously driven by politics where he started, but he's also got a lot of interests, and he got a lot of, he cares about a lot of things. So
right.
It's been nice for him.
He does. Of course, Bob Dole was his first big account.
Right.
But he did the Martin Luther King Memorial.
That's right.
And that I did some fundraising for the Tuskegee Airmen. We'd use that list a lot. It was over 100,000 names. I forget, maybe 200,000. It was a huge list.
No, they did a very good job of that. And I was very excited about it. Yeah. In the same way, I think they've done fundraising for the 9/11 Memorial.
Right. It's a lot of art museums.
Yeah.
Now, about the senior fundraising, or any other appeals, I kind of gather from you're saying too many people are saying stuff that's not credible, like the sky's falling. If you don't you send your gift. Do you think that's not credible or as effective as the duty or obligation?
What I think is that it's almost always a mix of things, and I think the sky is falling rhetoric to an extent is important because you have to have the urgency and the edge, and at the end of the day, I mean, that's really what your message is. There's something that's broken we have to fix, and we can't fix it without a lot of people getting involved. But I think that the style and the intensity of that language has to be broadened a little. At least my experience was that it did. And, one of the things you go back to, and this was, one of the reasons that I liked the shift from direct marketing from general advertising is that at the end of the day, it's still a one-to-one communication. It's one guy sitting down and reading one letter written from one person. And if you sit across from somebody and you don't want them shouting at you, you want them talking to you. You want a conversation. You don't want a lecture. And so I think that if I sit across from somebody who says, "Oh my God, I mean, I'm going to turn off pretty quickly, even if I agree with them." So
let me ask you a final question.
Sure.
Or two questions, actually.
Sure.
One is, I forgot to ask you, from your music career, what was helpful to your advertising or direct mail? Was there anything that...
That's a good question. It's funny. What I do think is this. My major in college was composition and theory, and then I got very interested in the question of how music works. And I do think there's a connection that I've thought about over the years, which is that the decision you make as a creator of a work of art over time is, what do you do to get somebody's interest in the first place? And the second thing is, what do you do to hold their interest once you've got their interest?
I can see that, yeah.
And in the great works of music, the great symphony composers like Beethoven and Brahms, the challenge of that is extraordinary in terms of how do you actually sustain the interest literally from measure to measure. And some of the lesser symphony composers, somebody like Tchaikovsky or Rachmaninoff, they write beautiful music, but it doesn't arrest your attention the way that the great composers do.
Sure.
And so it's a little BS-y sounding, but truthfully, I think there's a similarity to it, which is that when you sit down to write copy, you got to think from word to word, sentence to sentence, paragraph to paragraph. Am I holding your attention? And am I moving you where I need you to go? So I think it's in that sense
I can see
there's
that,
a similarity to that.
Keeping the attention, that's key.
Yeah.
But my last question is, what writer, what author has really impressed you? Is it Claude Hopkins, John Caples? I mean, is there somebody some book, maybe Cialdini's book influence?
Yeah, it's funny. That's a good question, and I guess for me it would just be good old Caples, because I go back to
Tested advertising.
Yeah,
I like that.
You go back to that corny old book. And I've given people copies of that over the years, and you got to go with the fact that it's very corny and it's very 1920s or 30s sounding.
Right.
But the basic ideas that he talks about there are still valid, because they're just communicating how you sell an idea to somebody with words on paper. And it's still, some of those old ads of, they all laughed when the waiter spoke to me in French, but when I talk back to them, they're like, oh,
right.
And it's like, that just, you just, what, it just hooks you.
That one's kind of a steal of his original one.
Well, it was set down and play the piano. I think
piano,
it was. Yeah, that's right. Which is
yeah,
what I suppose I should have remembered that first.
Yeah,
but yeah,
but they're brilliant. The thing I found interesting is you see some really bad. Most of the bad teasers are poor attempts at curiosity teasers.
Yeah.
And you see bad ones from the 70s, and then I had a later edition, and the ones from the 90s are just as bad. So it's interesting to me how many people, if you know that the odds are against you, most curiosity teasers at work have to be combined with self-interest or news.
Something,
it's interesting. Yeah, and I do like that John Caples book too. Yeah, I think it is.
It's just very, very corny, but it's just. I mean, that's to me that's the simplest, basic book that says, this is kind of how this works. So.
Oh, great. Well, we have an earlier podcast on that you might want to listen to.
Yeah, well, let's listen. It'll be fun. All right.
I appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, I appreciate you asking me. It was very enjoyable.
Anyway, till next time. Talk to you later. Bye.